Rabbi, it's 10 o'clock.
Okay, 10 o'clock. Thank you, our wonderful TA, Yael. Do we have music this morning?
We have Jacob Nimi with
Ah,
music.
beautiful.
Jacob, are you here?
I am, yes, and I'm going to be bringing in, tying us into Shir Yaakov's psalm project
Oh,
All right.
beautiful.
this morning.
I will share my screen.
So he set a few verses from Psalm 9. I think it's 10 and 11, part of 14 and part of verse 2. He really made like a
Oh, man.
hodgepodge.
Sorry, I have too much stuff here.
And he uses Havaya. While Yael's bringing it up, I'll just say he uses Havaya for the Yud He Vav He for the four-letter name of God. So you'll hear that again, just like what I offered yesterday. Also,
Can you see my screen?
not yet.
Oh, it's not on? Oh, okay. Sorry.
He also uses the word that word that we came across, choneneni. He contracts it to just being choneni.
It's a more normal way to say it.
Well, I found out, I checked, the word choneni actually has a dagish in the first nun, because the root is...
That means a double nun.
Yep, so...
Got
Can
it.
people see now?
No, not
I
yet.
see,
Oh, my goodness.
I see a folder that has the PDFs in it, but not the actual PDF itself.
All right. On my screen, it looks like that's what I'm looking at. So, I'm not sure what to do.
Maybe double click on the thing.
Double click on the what thing?
Double click on the file.
Because right now, Yael, we see your the folder that has the PDFs for Psalm 9 in it.
All right. Do you see it now?
No.
So
We had
Jacob,
it for
maybe you
the
should
brief
sing.
one.
Well, let's sing and we'll listen.
Sure, yeah. So this is Vihi Havaya Miskav Ladach, that God is the haven for the oppressed and the haven for in times of trouble. Vihi Havaya Miskav Ladach, Miskav Leitot Batzara, ויפתחו לך יורש שמך כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה ויהי הוויה נשגב לדעת נשגב לעיתות בצרה ויפתחו לך יורש שמך כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה Choneni, choneni havaya, choneni, choneni, choneni havaya, vihi havaya, miskav ladach, miskav leitot batzara, ויפתחו לך יורש שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה, חונני, חונני, חונני הוויה, חונני, חונני, חונני הוויה, ויהי הוויה מסעדך, משגב לעיתות בצרה, ויפתחו לך יורש שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה.
Beautiful. And I repeat what we've said before, the project that Yaakov Shir has been doing is really fantastic. And I'm not sure which psalm he's up to, but he's doing a psalm a day, starting when we started. And he's composing something every single day, taking a line or a phrase from the psalm in the consecutive order. There is, as I keep saying, a long tradition to this idea of just moving through the entire book of Psalms in order, not just picking out the greatest hits, so to speak, but there's a sense of the collective power, of the cumulative power of the entire book. So we're going to now start with Psalm 9 in Levi's Psalm 9 translation. And we're going to do Levi and maybe alter also back and forth a little bit today. And if there are things that, I don't have the chat from yesterday in front of me, which I meant to print out, but I don't. So if there are questions or thoughts you have from yesterday and we didn't get to, for sure, bring them back today. I'm happy to look at them. So some of the things I love about Levi's translation, first of all, he has the Hebrew and English together, which you'll see we don't. Alter only does the English.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. So I love it when the Hebrew and English is together, but of course he has to do it therefore in 2 volumes to be able to accomplish. He has Hebrew, English, and then his commentary, which is lovely. But he has to do it in 2 volumes. So that's why Alter gave up on the Hebrew so that he can have a one volume text. Now I want you to notice a couple of things before we dive in. One of the things that Levi does is very interesting is that he tries to echo the acrostic element in the Hebrew in the English. So if for those of you who are not the Hebrew readers, you'll see what he does is that he bolds in Hebrew and in English the acrostic elements. So you could see the Alephs. Has Kita Aleph all learned Aleph so far? Does everybody in the class now know what an Aleph looks like? Who's in Kita Aleph? Somebody could tell me if I can assume everybody's learned an Aleph. Do we have anybody in the class? Hey, yes.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Haven't gotten to Aleph yet? Okay. All right.
Not yet.
Okay, so let's look. So if you look where it says the number 2 on the Hebrew side, next to the 2 is an Aleph, and you'll see there are 4 bolded Alephs. That's what I was pointing out yesterday when Jacob was singing his setting for these first couple of lines. And if you look over on the left on the English side, you see the A in Adonai and all applause and anthems. So what Levi has done, which I think is very nice, is that he's echoed the acrostic nature of the psalm by using English words that all start with an A. And then if you look down along the line, you see verse 4, the B, the bet for Beshuv, and the B in backward. And looking down, you see C. And remember, I told you there's no Daled. So then it goes right to Hey or E. And as we continue, you'll see. So I think it's a lovely thing that he did to echo this in the format itself. And his translation, he really uses the English words that will start with those letters. So that's one thing that I think is lovely. So let's just read through a little bit and we'll notice some things that Levi does with this. Again, Levi loves Lamanat Seyach as conductor. He really sees this as a musical first of all, the first thing to always notice is that he keeps the superscription. And he understands the Lamanat Seyach, and as we've discussed, nobody for sure knows what it means, because the Shoresh doesn't seem to have anything to do with conducting, but okay, we don't know what it means. But he says to the conductor, Almut Laben. Now, he also doesn't translate it, as we saw in the Sepharia. It's a very strange 2 words in Hebrew that are a little hard to understand, very hard to understand. Alter likes to see Mut Laben as an opaque, he calls it opaque musical term. And so does Levi. Mut Laben for Levi, he says in his notes, this is most likely a musical term, so he and Alter are similar in that way. Like the others, its meaning has been lost. So he prefers to keep the italics transliteration of the Hebrew to indicate we don't really know what it is. But he's sure it's musical, as is Alter. Mut is from the same shoresh as mot or lamut, like to die, or mavet, which we have seen in other places. And so there are many commentaries that attempt to tie this psalm to a particular person or to a nation's demise that has something to do with death. BDB, which we've discussed, is the book that does all the roots of every word in the Bible, suggests a relationship between Almut Laben and Alma, which means young woman. And that's one of the words that Christian translations translate as virgin. Perhaps, now this I think is such a stretch, but I wanted to show you to encourage people to feel empowered and emboldened to make broad and huge leaps. Perhaps indicating that this psalm is to be sung by a young woman or in a boy, ben, falsetto voice. Okay, that's a lot to get from Almut Laben, but all right. That's what I mean. Yeah, it's a pretty big stretch, but okay. So verse 2, Adonai, I praise with all my heart. So remember that Levi takes Yud He Vav He, and he's so uncomfortable in replicating it, he does the Yud Yud. You'll see that. That's a pretty standard thing in a lot of Jewish books. In many Sidurim, instead of Yud He Vav He, they'll put a Yud Yud with the vowels that are under Yud He Vav He, under the Yud Yud, which is, you couldn't possibly pronounce that. It's just, but it's indicating, those vowels are indicating, for those who can read that, they've taken this is a traditional Jewish scribal trick, to take the vowels from Yud He Vav He, to add them to the Yud Yud, to indicate this is a stand-in for the four-letter name of God, the Shem HaMeforash, or the Tetragrammaton, or the big one, the big name. So Adonai, I praise B'chol Libi, as somebody. Now, what I also like about Levi's formatting is that you really see the parallelism, the biblical, the poetic parallelism, that you can see where the number 2 is. That's those two phrases are both part of the verse 2. But by separating them a little bit more, you get that poetic rhythm that's a little easier to see than just when it's in a full line. And you have to look for and he's doing this according to that cantillation mark, the etnachta, which is under the bet of Libi. Now you see in Bechol, for those who have been studying this or know about this, the bet in Bechol has a dagesh in it, but the chaf does not have a dagesh in it. A dagesh is the dot inside of the letter that changes how that letter is pronounced. So when there's a dagesh in a bet, it's a b. When there's no dagesh in the bet, it's a v. So they're the same letter. And we don't consider them two different letters in the Hebrew alphabet. If you recite the Hebrew alphabet, sometimes when we Americans learn the alphabet, we would say bet, vet, so that we know the two different sounds, but it's one letter. We consider it one letter, but in different forms, it's pronounced differently. And there are 6 letters like that in the Hebrew alphabet, that whether or not they have that dot inside of them changes the pronunciation. It's not true entirely in modern Hebrew, but traditionally there are 6 letters that have this feature. You put the dot inside, it changes its pronunciation. So the 6 letters are called, I don't know, Yael, did you study this as a kid? Did you have an acronym for this?
Beged Keshet.
Yeah, that's how I learned it too. I've heard other people pronounce it a little differently, like Baged or something, but Beged Kefet are those 6 letters. That's how we remember what the 6 letters are. Beged, Bet, Gimel, Daled, and then the next word, Kaf, the letter that's in Bechol, Pei, and Taf. Those 6 letters, if there's a dot in it, they're pronounced differently than if there's no dot. So most famously, I think, for American or Yiddish-speaking Jews, is the pronunciation of the Taf. If there's a dagesh in the Taf, it's a T sound. And in Ashkenazic Hebrew, if there's no dagesh, it's a S sound. So Shabbat, believe me, I'm sure when Yael was growing up, she never heard Shabbos.
Never.
Unless she was never. Shabbos is a completely foreign word to an Israeli, because for us American Jews, we inherited that word from Yiddish, and Eastern European Jews pronounced, if there's no dot in the taf, it's a S sound. So Shabbos or Shabbat, depending on whether, and there's no dagesh, which is why Israelis are terrible spellers in Hebrew, And people who learn this rule and know the difference between a s and a t know when the dagesh is there. Another famous example of that is talis or talit. So Israelis often spell talit with a tet at the end because of they can't tell the difference between a tet and a taf because it's the same letter. But if you know that it's pronounced talis for a Yiddish speaker or an American Hebrew speaker, and that's not influenced by Israeli Hebrew, talis means there's no dagesh in that final taf, and talit means there's no distinction made between the two. So that dagesh is there, as we say in the rule when you're studying grammar, berosh milah uverosh havara. So in the beginning of the word or the beginning of a syllable. So that dagesh is found when that letter is in the beginning of a word. So if you look at the beginning of verse 4, beshuv, the bet is in the beginning of the word. So it gets a dagesh. Bechol, in verse 2, it gets a dagesh. The exception is if the letter is following an open syllable. So, like you see in verse 3, and I'll go on from here in case this is making people feel scared. In verse 3, vach, the bet does not have a dagesh because the word before it ends in what we call an open syllable. So that vowel, tsa, is that's an open syllable. There's no consonant ending it. If that word had been something like, which doesn't exist exactly, but something like el tzat, it would have been bach. So the taf, which would have ended a word. By the way, Israelis miss this up all the time because they're just going by ear, and ear doesn't function the same way as grammar. Guess what? Although this particular rule is based on what's easier to say. Honestly, if it's an open syllable, going into va is easier than ba. So that's just, we'll look at this, and I'll repeat this in various times during our study because it becomes important in biblical Hebrew grammar. But so any questions about that? Just so that, and I'll just, for those who have not gotten up to this level, don't worry. This is just fun stuff. It's just, this adds the whipped cream on top of reading Hebrew. So you start to notice things like all those little dots start to mean something.
So I have a question.
Yes.
On the second line of verse 2, a sapra kol.
Yep.
Isn't a sapra an open?
So this is
kol now has the dot, the dagesh.
Brilliant question by a very brilliant Israeli. The additional rule or the additional exceptions depends on sometimes the cantillation, and if it's accented and it's accented, so it should be an unaccented open syllable is the actual rule. I didn't say that in order to not level and make another level, but for Yael, you could follow that. So the rule is berosh milah uverosh havara, in the beginning of a word or a syllable, except when it follows an unaccented open syllable.
So what is an accented or unaccented open syllable?
So that's accented, so the rule doesn't apply. See where the cantillation mark is?
Because the cantillation mark is on the aleph?
No, see it's on the resh.
On the resh, right? It's a revia.
So then it's an accent.
Revia mugrash. It's a geresh revia. The actual accent is on the resh, though.
Right.
So this stuff, like somebody like Cantor Nimi, and I know Naomi Hirsch is on, really knows this stuff, because when you hear somebody Lane who really knows this stuff, you really appreciate it. So that's why. So it's in the beginning of a word, the beginning of a syllable, except when it follows an unaccented open syllable. I didn't say that because I was trying to keep it, but you asked the question. But here's a question, Yael, and for those of you who are on the Gimel and above level, this is just a little piece of whipped cream for you. Why is the bet in Libi? Why does that have a dagesh in the bet?
Well, it's a beginning of a new syllable. Li is
but
one
it's
syllable and B
that's true,
is another syllable. No?
Li, yep, but you would think it would be, It's unaccented, so you'd think it would be Levi, right? According to the rule I just said, it would be Levi because it's following an unaccented open syllable. Okay, I stumped you because there's another rule. There's another rule. Sometimes the dagesh is not there at all because of beged kafet, and that's very annoying. So the same dot can be used to mean different things. In the case of, and this refers to something that Jacob said before about the word in, sometimes the dagesh means it's a double letter that's been conflated or combined. So we know
because it's my live, Libi. Got it.
So it was. So there you go. All right, that was a little sugar for those who are more advanced students. Okay, so Odeh Adonai, Adonai, I praise b'chol libi, with all of my heart. Asapra kol niflotecha, all your wonders will I in tales recount. Now he did that, of course, to get the all word in the first. He wanted to keep the A acrostic, so his choosing a translation to keep the acrostic going. Applause, I think that's very clever. There's no word for applause in the Hebrew there, but he's trying to get this idea. Applause and shouts of joy I offer you. Why not? It fits the rhythm and it fits the intention. Anthems, lovely way to translate Azamra, Shimcha. He wants to make sure he can use the A. So I love that. He's really working hard there. It's fine. It's charming, and it's showing you another way to, in English, reflect something about the Hebrew that you might, that in English, that he wants an English speaker to get the rhythm of Adonai, all applause anthems.
Rabbi Naomi Hirsch, Cantor
Yes.
Naomi Hirsch has her hand up.
So
Okay.
I thank you, Yael. I put it back down because we had passed over it, but the additional rule has also to do with, as got mentioned briefly, the ta'am mechaber, the conjunctive trope. So, for instance, in verse 3, esmecha ve'etzavach, the reason, as I learned it, that the dagesh fell out of that bet to become a vet is because not only did the word before end in an open syllable in the hey, but also it was a conjunctive trope, or in Hebrew, ta'am mechaber, underneath the tzadi, there was a mercha.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so it would be both that and that it's accented.
Yeah, whereas on asapra, it's a disjunctive trope.
Right. And it's accented. So there you go. You folks, you are now hearing, this is a very high level of getting into some of the real detail. I'm telling you, I've never taught this stuff in all of my years of teaching it at CBST. I love it. It's really fun, and it gets even more fun. But for those of you who are overwhelmed by it, don't be. But for those of you, it should be kind of just tickling your brain. It makes stuff you've probably looked at your whole life starting to emerge with even more color, I hope. Okay.
And I just want to say quickly, for those of you, it's Naomi again, for those of you who are Torah readers, it's really helpful when you're trying to memorize a Torah reading and you think, oh my gosh, I keep thinking that's Bach, but it's really Bach. But if you are aware that it's,
right.
Of the trup, it's helpful.
And actually, here's another example. Actually, Vach is another example of the ending Vach. To a modern Hebrew speaker, it looks feminine, because masculine would be v'cha. This is what I mentioned, I think, was that yesterday or last week? That even though this is what's confusing to a lot of people, because it looks like it's feminine, and we would love it to be feminine. It's unlikely feminine in the initial intent. However, many of us who are translating things now love to use it as feminine. The biblical Hebrew, for various reasons, and as I said, rabbinic Hebrew as well. Sometimes this ending it looks like this. Unfortunately, it's not unusual. So it's not this, and this is not. But you should notice it, because niflotecha, right? So why not translate it as the first one is talking about towards a masculine God, and the second one using the feminine form. biblical grammar people will say it's not actually that, but why not? Like if we're playing with language, but you can see that contrast. One is absolutely the masculine ending and one is a little more ambiguous. Are there other questions about this, or we'll go to four? Okay, Beshuv. And again, you see the B for backwards, which I think is very creative because Beshuv turned my enemies. And one thing I'd love to do, and we'll maybe do going forward, is start making these lists. Remember what I said yesterday? Look for the names of which words get repeated multiple times and which words are used for enemy becomes important. Backwards turn my enemies. They fall over themselves. So he's putting this into three phrases. Oh no, yeah, 3 for verse 4. Backwards turn my enemies. Yikashlu, they fall over themselves. V'yovdu mipanecha, they perish from your presence, from in front of you. Again, mipanecha, the word which we have all through the Siddur and biblical Hebrew, is the same shoresh as face, panim, or punim. And mipanecha also means from in front of you, from in front of your face. You might imagine that. 5. Because you have rendered a judgment of justice, asita mishpati v'dini. Mishpat, that word which is so important in this psalm and throughout this, but look for this shoresh, look a lot for this shoresh in this psalm. Shin pei tet. Is Lisa asking about libi? Because we think the shoresh of lev is levav, el, lamed bet bet. So if the shoresh is actually lamed bet bet, back up in libi, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that thought when I said that. So the shoresh is probably lamed bet bet, and the bets combine. That dagesh is indicating a double bet. It's a magic bet. And we see this in a few letters. Jacob mentioned there's a magic nun we had in another word that he used. Now I can't remember the word, Jacob, but the double nun is so.
In choneni.
Right.
From chanun.
So the nun is doubled, and we know it's doubled because it has a dagesh in it. That's like a magic dagesh. So it has nothing to do with beged kafet. There is no, nun isn't even in beged kafet. In this case, it's complicated because bet is in beged kafet, but it's doubled for a different reason. So you kind of have to go through when you're working it through. You have to say, is this the rule, or which is creating this situation? And you kind of have to go through them in your mind, looking at the different. And in this case, we have to eliminate that it's because of beged kafet, and then we ask ourselves, so maybe the dagesh is there for a different reason, and it's there because the shoresh is actually lamed bet bet, which is an unusual shoresh, and the bet sometimes gets doubled up. That happens a bunch of times to bets and nuns. Isn't libi a noun? No. The suffix e means my. So it's my heart. So, yeah. So libi is so the yud is not part of the shoresh there. The yud is part of the suffix indicating possess. It's a possessive suffix indicating my heart. And the Siddur, CBSD Siddur is called B'chol Levavcha because it's all of your heart. But B'chol Libi is all of my heart. Okay? We are up to 5 because you've made for me. So remember, this is, you've made for me justice and laws. You have sat on the bench as a righteous, a just judge. I like that, a just judge. Righteous, honest, true, uncorrupt. Tzedek means all of the opposite of corrupt, evil. It's all the opposite. The kind of judge you would want, the judge who really cared about justice. 6, now everybody notice there's a gimel starting the Aleph Bet Gimel acrostic. And notice what's inside that gimel. It's a dagesh. A dagesh is inside the gimel because the rosh milah. It's at the beginning of a word. Now, we don't pronounce the gimel differently. So even if it's a dagesh or no dagesh, it's a g. Scholars think that with the dagesh or without the dagesh, I can't remember which one, it was probably a j sound. And interestingly, nobody knows for sure, by the way, obviously, but people think, and interestingly, in modern Hebrew, if you want to write the j sound, if you're doing a word from English, and like George, like you'll see the word, the name George. So Yael, how would you write the word George?
I would write a gimel with an apostrophe.
Exactly. That little chick on top of the gimel means it's a j sound. So scholars think, now I can't remember which one, honestly. I think it's without the dagesh, was a j, because j and g are often connected in languages, and they think one was originally pronounced the j sound. Okay, for instance, Jesus, which Israelis write all the time, by the way, the word Jesus is written just the way Americans say Jesus, and they write it with a gimel, with that little chick, that little apostrophe that Yael mentioned. Okay, and I don't mean people who believe in Jesus, I mean Jewish Israelis who are just writing the word Jesus, like we would say Jesus. Okay, the arta. So that's why the dagesh is in the gimel, and then you see the dagesh in the top at the end of the word. Why is there a dagesh in the top? Beged kefet. It's not at the beginning of a word. It's not at the beginning of a syllable. But it's following a closed syllable. Gar is a closed syllable. So ta, it's the beginning of an open, the next syllable. So it's not. It is the beginning of a syllable, but it's not opening, not following a closed, unaccented syllable. All right, maybe I shouldn't do too many of these. Goyim, there. By the way, look, no dagesh in the gimel, because it's following an open. Okay, I gotta stop this. Okay, I go crazy. Okay, goyim. So you censoring the nations, goyim, ibadata, and then destroying. Now you'll notice this word ibadata is the same word as up in verse 4, or the same shoresh of the word in 4. All these words of destroying, they perish. This word is perish. Ibed means to destroy, perish, erase, those kinds of things. Ibadata rasha. So you've gotten rid of the evil. Shemam machita le'olam va'ed. Like Yimach Shemo, as Yael described. Shemam machita. You have erased their name le'olam va'ed. This sentence captures what, in many ways, Jewish thought sees as the ultimate, how would I say this? The ultimate, not disgrace, the ultimate, so
curse.
It's not, the ultimate what? What is
Curse.
Curse, yes, good. The ultimate curse is that your name will be forgotten. Nobody will know you. There will be no legacy you've left behind in either action or deed. And Olam Va'ed means for this world and forever. So there's a sense there that it's not just what we see, in other words. And this is a little bit of a response to why do the wicked flourish? Well, they might flourish right now. But the psalm is telling us, Shemam machita le'olam va'ed. Their names have been blotted out forever. It might be different than what we're experiencing in the moment. And again, going back to what Mark Shemilnik brought up yesterday, how do we know what's external and internal? We have to balance it and kind of carry both through the psalm. Let's try and get through a couple more of Levi. Ha'oyev tamu haravot lanetzach. Enemies, another word for, so the big words for enemies in this psalm, we have Rasha, Oyev, Goyim, meaning the others, and they have, let's see, there was one more, I think. Yeah, okay, Rasha. So Ha'oyev, the enemy, Tamu Charavot Lanetzach, turn to eternal desolation. So Lanetzach, similar to the Olam Va'ed, it's a parallel to that. It has a sense of eternity, or and Va'arim, like Ir, David, Ir HaKodesh, this holy city, Ir Arim, you have uprooted. And here we have the same word again for an avad. Avad. See, I said it with the dagesh, but you see that word aleph, bet, daled, we see over and over again in this psalm to describe what happens to the enemy, so to speak. Every trace of them is destroyed. So we've now had the word destroyed 3 times in the last couple of psukim in different forms. What does, of course, destroyed mean? And the psalm, I think, is saying that there will not be a legacy, which is a very interesting question also for us if we were to read this internally. What does it mean that those things which curse us will not have a legacy? If we were to read this internally, I feel very much that the psalm is trying to tell us that while we might be in the midst of terrible personal suffering, that there won't be a legacy, meaning there'll be a way for us to emerge, not completely, the destruction we might experience in our personal lives will not necessarily be the legacy for our entire lives. And that's hard to believe when you're in the middle of personal destruction. But it's a very powerful image that we have to aspirationally keep repeating to ourselves. Destruction, if we follow a certain path, so to speak, if we find a way to recreate life and recreate ourselves, destruction does not necessarily have the legacy for the rest of our existence. So, maybe I'll stop there to see if there are other questions or comments, so we have time for some conversation, and then we'll continue tomorrow about either language or some of the, and it's okay if you want me to repeat anything, it's okay. Sorry. Dogs are coming in and out, in and out. Yes. Anybody? Do we have any, look at the.
Shep has his hands up.
That's singular, hand. I don't have hands.
One.
One hand, that's it, yeah. So I have just a question and a comment. So this beged kefet, well, beged actually means clothes in Hebrew, coincidentally. Does kefet have any meaning? Just
No,
curious.
it's just a way to remember which of the 6 letters.
The other thing is, but the J sound, but so like you said before about Chag and the Hajj. So if our G, maybe the Gimel was not really a J, maybe it wasn't the same word, the Hajj. Maybe it was originally the Hajj, or no.
Well, originally we probably pronounced it. That's why, and that's the same letter in Arabic. So it's, yes, that's an example.
That's interesting. Now
there
it
are a
sounds
lot of different examples. And there are some Jews from some Arabic countries who do pronounce the Gimel differently with the J sound. I don't know, it's with the Dagesh or without the Dagesh. That's being lost in Israel today as everybody's absorbing into modern Israel, Hebrew, which is normal. Same thing, a lot of Jews from some of the Arab countries pronounce the chet differently. A modern Israeli speaker, Hebrew speakers pronounce the chet and the chaf the same. But if you're from an Arabic country, the chet is pronounced differently. I can't do it. Can anybody do that, the Arabic chet?
I can do it. And
Okay.
Just to let you know, I have a very good childhood friend who I'm still in touch with, and she comes from a Yemenite family, and she still pronounces the chet as het.
Exactly. And in Israel, you can hear the difference. I mean, you hear somebody speak. It's mostly older people, but they're still, and you can speak, any Arabs who speak Hebrew often can't pronounce the chets in an Israeli Hebrew name. You can hear an Arabic speaker, which is one of the reasons there are some great Israeli movies where there are Israelis and Jewish and Arabs interacting, and an Israeli watching that movie totally understands who's Arab and who's Jewish, even if they're all speaking Hebrew. And an American audience who's just watching what do you call it, subtitles, doesn't get it. And there's often a lot of interesting stuff going on. Both fluent Hebrew speakers, but the chet and the ayin also is pronounced differently. A modern Jewish or modern Israeli, does your friend pronounce the ayin differently than the aleph?
Right. I'm not sure if she does, but there is a difference from the aleph and the ayin. And again,
That's it. It's a guttural. The ayin is considered a guttural vowel, even though most of us pronounce it silently. But it's actually a guttural, and it has certain grammatical features as a guttural, but you can hear it in an Arabic speaker. So Arabic speakers have maintained some of these distinctions that have been lost in Hebrew, which is why a lot of people love to, one of the really interesting things about it. There was a famous Israeli movie about a prison, and it was about the Jewish prisoners and the Arab prisoners' relationship. And the Jewish prisoner, the leader of the Jewish gang in prison, was blonde and blue-eyed. No, was dark-skinned and dark hair. And the Arab prisoner was blonde and blue-eyed, which is often the case. But you could tell who was Arab and who was Jewish by the pronunciation of the Hebrew, and it was fascinating. But Americans watching the movie just couldn't even get it. Another great example of this and it challenges people's idea of color issues in Israel. There's the great singers Achinoam she who's an Israeli. I think she's Yemenite, right? Very dark skinned, and she often sings with a Palestinian singer, Nira Awad. Is that the right name? I think it's Nira Awad. Nira is blonde, blue-eyed, and Achinoam is dark-skinned, and American audiences do not understand, and that's why color is a complicated thing. Yep.
The movie is Beyond the Wall.
Beyond the one about the prison thing. Really interesting movie. Really, really interesting movie. Beyond the Wall.
Thank you, Rabbi. I love this.
We have 3 hands up, and it's 10:42. So how about if we do 3 people and then
Good.
So Jeremy Lawrence.
I just lost the first mention of destroy of Aleph Beit.
I just lost you, Jeremy. Jeremy, we just lost you. Could you repeat that? Sorry.
I have lost the first mention of destroy, Aleph Beit.
Daled.
Daled. Thank you. Is that been?
Do you want me to point it out? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So in verse 4, v'yovdu.
Yovdu. Okay.
See that?
Yeah.
It looks quite different, and that's an example. Without the dagesh, it looks different. And then ibadata in verse 6.
Yeah, I've got the other 2.
Okay, great.
All right. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Jeremy.
Randy Sarnoff.
Hi. Okay, so my question has to do with the way we write God. Levi used Yud Yud in this particular verse. I've been printing a lot, and I don't want to throw away the Yud Hey Vav Hey, and I've been very careful to put that away to be buried. If I write YHYH on a piece of paper, is that okay to throw out?
Yes, because that's English. It's totally not real. Yes, yeah.
Okay, so Yud Hey Vav Hey in Hebrew is the only piece of paper I should not throw away, or is there another version of that I shouldn't throw?
If it's in Yud Yud, Hebrew and Yud Yud, you shouldn't throw it away either.
Okay, good to know. And Yud and Hey itself also?
Hey alone, no, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
And
that's why I use Hey if I'm writing. Who writes anymore? But anyway, when I used to write. Actually, when I write my notes, the only time I do it is when I write notes for Dreshot. I'll write a Hey.
Ira, unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Rabbi, I'm thinking about the different words for enemy and wondering if they, it reminded me of like some of the northern tribes or the Aleutians, for example, in Alaska, who have dozens and dozens of words for snow because each, there are so many textures and things that they're after. Is that a similar kind of thing with these different words?
I've never thought about it that way, but we're going to talk more about the different words and try and understand them. But I haven't thought about it that way. You'll see, part of what I'm pointing out to you is we'll see the same words over and over again, but there are a couple of different ones. And let's try and understand what they are. But what they meant to the original author is probably going to be different to us. But for sure, the tribe of Israelites felt under siege a lot.
All right.
I think we human beings, our condition is to feel under siege. The question is what we do with it. I think it's our human condition.
Should we have Rabbi
Yes,
yes. Jacob Nimi? Okay, sorry, let me see.
Well, I hope I didn't do too much grammar today, and we'll keep going tomorrow with Levi and Alter if we get there to Alter.
Is this what we're doing, Jacob? Can you see my screen?
I can, and it's perfect. Thank you.
Beautiful.
All right, so this is the text that that we were singing before. This is from Yeshua Yaakov. And I see the citation, verses 10 and 11, 14, and part of 2. So, all right. Ooh. There we go. Vi havaya miskav ladach, miskav leitot batzara, ויפתחו לך יורש שמך כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה ויהי הוויה משכב לדך משכב לעיתות בצרה ויפתחו לך יורש שמך כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה משכב לעיתות בצרה ויפתחו לך יורש שמך כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And Naomi, I love your references to the music group Beged Kefet. Maybe we'll bring one of their songs to play for everybody. It is a music group that started by a bunch of cantors and rabbis when they were in rabbinical and cantorial school.
Including Benji Schiller, who's sitting of Azamra, we heard the other day.
Exactly, what a great connection, including Benji Schiller. So it's a wonderful singing group called Beged Kefet. They've been around for a long time. I'm not sure they're singing so much anymore together, are they? But we could play some of their stuff, and it's fun to know that that's where they got their name from, is from the study of Beged Kefet. Has nothing to do with what the words mean, but just these 6 letters that have a dagesh in it. And Naomi, apparently they have a song about one little dot talking about what a dagesh does or something. So there you go. I like that drash. One little dot can make a big difference in the world. So let's all be a little dot, right? Thank you, everybody. So much fun studying with you. Thanks for indulging me.
Very cool. Thank you.
See everybody tomorrow. Tonight we have a Shiva Minyan for Nancy Alpert's father and lots of wonderful programs as well. So if folks interested, Diane Berhenny is fabulous. She's doing a program starting tonight for 3 weeks. Hope everybody got the information. If not, info@cbst.org. Ask us. We'll make sure to get back to you. Any questions about any of those things? I'm happy to stay on for a couple of minutes, and I've got to go to a staff meeting.
I just want to note one other pronunciation thing. A letter in Arabic that is kind of a combination of Gimel and Ayin. So in Hebrew you would say Aza, and in English you say Gaza. But it really in Arabic is the same letter. It's a very deep.
Guttural. It's deep.
Yeah.
Aza. Aza.
Aza. Aza.
Aza.
And it's the same thing with Gomorrah. It's really Amora.
Right, Sdom and Amora, and we say Gomorrah.
Amora, yeah.
But it's that.
Very interesting. That's very interesting.
Emails. kind of thing.
Rabbi Kleinbaum, it's Cantor Hirsch. I wanted to know, will Diane's sessions be recorded? If I register, will I be able to hear them later? Because I'm teaching while she teaches.
Excellent question. This I do not know.
Who would?
Write to info@cbst.org.
Okay, thanks.
We're trying to have one address so that we have people on vacation during the summer. So there's one place to go for information, and we'll have that always staffed by somebody. So that's a good, so that we don't have to worry about somebody being away or not. So try that. I do
What's
not know.
happening
Good
tonight?
question.
Rabbi, what's happening tonight?
We have a lot of things happening tonight. Diane Berhenny is starting her 3-session class on coping with issues related to COVID-19, depression, stress, anxiety, isolation.
Got that.
And we're having a Shiva Minyan for Nancy Alpert, our longtime member. Her father died last week in Boston. He was buried there. And she's had 2 nights of Shiva with the synagogue in Boston, and tonight we're doing a Shiva.
Oh.
And there's a Kita Gimel class tonight. How are they? Yeah. I think next week I'm going to stop in on all the different classes. I want to see how they're all going. All right, friends, I'm going to hop off to go to our class. To go to my staff meeting. Got to keep track of what. But here, Beged Kefet. Yeah, I'm looking at the comments now. All right, everybody. See you either later today at one thing or another, or see you tomorrow in class.